We're really trying to change our mindsets to a way that our ancestors used to think. Connecting to your ancestors is so important, and yet we don't do it. No matter what the color of your skin is, you have ancestors. Learn from the past mistakes of our ancestors and who we are now to make a better future for all of humanity and for nature and our world, our home. Hello, my name is Jacob Todson, and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. Well, we're going to do a Q&A today. So basically, I asked on YouTube questions you guys have about paganism, particularly about Norse paganism, but maybe a little bit about Celtic as well, and the global pagan topic in general. And an important thing to note, if you haven't been to this channel before, is I'm not a scholar. I have a degree in arts and art history. I don't really focus too much on the scholarly information. It's important, but at the end of the day, I see pagan religions as the religions of the farmers, the religions of the common folk back in the day. So that's the lens I kind of look at these religions and these spiritualities as they exist now in our world. So if all of this sounds interesting to you, this is something I'm going to be doing every month for my supporters on Patreon. So I've changed the way my tiers work. Even at $5 a month, you're going to get a monthly Q&A where you can ask questions and I'll answer them in a video format, much like this one. I also have a monthly vlog I'm going to be producing at the $10 tier. The $15 tier, you're going to be seeing exclusive interviews and the full-length interviews that I do for this channel as well. And truly, all of this support truly helps me as a content creator create this content for you. With that, let's go ahead and begin this video answering your questions on paganism. So this first one is going to come from Ali Olsen, who asks, how much do we know about Norse paganism prior to the conversion to Christianity? What we really know about Norse paganism as it survived in Scandinavia before Christianization is that they gave offerings to the dead, that they were very big, lavish burial graves. And these graves ranged from single-person graves in the shape of boats all the way up to massive boat graves with a lot of different items in there. So through death and the burial practices of Scandinavia, we learn a lot about what they viewed in the afterlife. They definitely viewed it as some form of journey, especially since a lot of their graves were in the shape of boats. Now, of course, looking into the written source material as recorded by Christian scholars, we do get a lot of information. In fact, we would have very little information on the individual gods if it wasn't for the Christian writings. You just have to take it with a grain of salt and remember that the written source materials of the Norse people are not a Bible. The entire reason that we have the Poetic and Prose Edda is because of the skalds of the past that were recording stories of heroes and their interactions with the gods of the past. And so a lot of these times, these stories of these heroes had mythological elements wrapped into them to build the prestige of an individual. And so storytelling is at the core of Norse paganism. And so I think that still should be at the core of Norse paganism today, is telling stories, both mythological and real in nature, of the great deeds that someone does, particularly your ancestors. The gods are there, but they're kind of part of these stories, these mythological tales. So while the gods are important, I think you do need to look into the ancestors quite a bit and honoring the dead. And then we do know somewhat of the spirits of the land, but I think they actually feared nature more than they loved it, and that's why they worshipped it. And I think that's a common theme we see in many pagan religions, is this relationship of humanity versus nature. And it's when humans began to take control of nature and dominate nature that we see that move away from the veneration of it. And so I think in the past it was more fear, whereas now in our modern world, we don't fear it as much as we need to understand that we need to love it and care for it, and that's why we honor the land spirits. So our relationship with everything, with paganism, is going to change. But hopefully all of this kind of gave you a good answer to that question. I could go on and on about it, but hopefully that's a good starting answer for it. This next question is from Big Mr. Biz. Why is it that the gods care at all about humans? So I think this answer is best answered by Neil Gaiman and his work, American Gods. I think that the relationship between gods and humans is the fact that the gods would not actually have any power or exist without the worship of humans. And this kind of goes into that question of, are the gods real? Are there actual beings that are the gods? Or are they manifestations of our combined worship? I think the answer is both. I think through our worship, through our songs and through our words, we actually do create the gods, we give them power, but then they are actually real. They exist in a spiritual world that we can interact with and receive blessings and guidance from. And so I think the gods take interest in our lives is because they need the worship, they need the veneration. Gods need humans in order to survive in their realm, just as much as we need their guidance to take care of the world that we live in. This next question comes from Lunig6416. For new pagans, what are the main starter kits for starting our journey? So this one is kind of difficult. Again, this one could be a whole video, I think. But if I were to give quick advice to someone, having a home altar is good. Having a sacred space in your home, in your bedroom, that is for the sacred only. You don't put your socks here, you don't put your underwear there. You only put sacred objects. So items pertaining to nature, pictures of family members, candles that you light when you meditate and reflect, and then also idols to the gods as well. So I think people tend to look at paganism as this kind of edgelordy thing at times, and they try to get into the deep end right away. And I don't recommend this at all. I think you need to start with the simple things, start with the fun things. Connecting to your ancestors is so fucking important, and yet we don't do it. Maybe it's because of our fear, because of our ultra polarized world right now and the conversations of race. But to me, you need to scoot that aside and realize that no matter what the color of your skin is, you have ancestors. But most of your ancestors were pagan. 80%, 90%, 95% of your ancestors were pagan before they were Christian or monotheistic. And so honoring your ancestors, you know, far back or recent is very, very important. If there's any connection I would say to the gods you should start with, it's the seasonal deities, the gods tied to the seasonal changes, the gods of summer, the gods of spring, the gods of autumn. I think if you kind of venerate the gods in these seasonal changes and look at your life and this cycle, I think you'll be very, much more connected. But again, I think I'm going to cover that in another question later down. Enjoy the process and connect to who you are as a person and the connection you have to your ancestors and the world around you.
My spiritual connection to the land is primarily through the lens of being part of that ecosystem. But what looking through the lens of history does is putting yourself in the shoes of our ancestors, that this was home. And that's a really powerful question, is that where do we feel at home?
This next question comes from the critic and the uncle 5784. Hi Jacob, what do you think about pagan groups of different denominations? Can they learn from one another, such as Norse, Celtic, Greek, etc.? So I've had the great pleasure to be among a lot of different pagan groups these days, and even groups that wouldn't call themselves pagan. You know, indigenous practices of the land, decolonized beliefs. There's a lot of different things that people call them these days, but ultimately the beliefs in nature. The beliefs in the land, you know, these kind of people. I can find that no matter who I am learning from or participating in pagan ceremonies with, there's a commonality, there's a common language, because at the end of the day, it all kind of comes back down to gratitude, respect, and connection with nature, and studying of nature, and understanding the sacredness of our world. I do think that there's gods that are tied to the self. I think there's gods that are tied to the seasonal changes, or to the sun, or to the earth, and we all just have different names for them. Now, in the case of like Norse paganism, I do think that there's gods that are unique to Norse paganism, such as Odin. Odin is a very unique figure, so is Loki, but they still kind of fall into these archetypes from other beliefs, such as the trickster or the wanderer. And this is not to take away from the fact that I don't think that they're all one and the same, but I do think that we're using different languages and different songs to worship relatively the same things. So I think ultimately the biggest thing is that we can all learn from one another. And I think there are more commonalities than there are differences between the various indigenous / pagan / nature belief systems. This next question is from Contus or Contus. What would you say to someone who's afraid of converting to paganism, heathenism, because if they feel it's right for them, they're afraid it would be seen as just being part of a trend or a fad religion, and thus not really being a true worshiper? A lot of people come to Scotland because Harry Potter, and that's not a great reason to come here. So I often see that these trends are often gateway drugs, so to speak, to deeper spirituality. So when I talk to people who are like, yeah, I got into Norse paganism because of the Vikings TV show, I think, great, you're on the healing path. If that's what started you on this connectiveness to yourself, to nature, great. Just continue that deeper journey. Don't stay at the surface level. And I think as long as you are genuine about it, that's what's going to matter. I I don't care if you've been into this a day, as long as you love it and respect it and don't, treat it as a trend. Yeah, I think that you'll find the love in it and the true healing powers that is these spiritual paths that make you a better version of yourself and give you a more connectedness to the world around you. This kind of term of decolonization has been popping up a lot for me. That's something I'm exploring and kind of shooting out there to see what people think. We're really trying to change our mindsets to a way that our ancestors used to think. And so that's not trendy. That's important. I think connecting to this is something our world desperately needs right now. I think no matter what you believe in, I think we need to return to a more ancient mindset, learn from the past mistakes of our ancestors and who we are now to make a better future for all of humanity and for nature and our world, our home. This next one's from user RD61X4BLZI1, whatever. Do you believe paganism or polytheism will make a big comeback in Europe and in the future, and if so, when? I think this one can be answered quite simply. Yes, I believe it is making a comeback, and it's happening right now. I've definitely really loved the term healing when it comes to spiritual revivals. And so I hope that Europe continues on this path of healing and not of hate. This next one's from Ali Roland9. I get the need to reconnect with the natural world, the environment, and the universe, but there is an element of romanticism to some of this. The ancient world was a territorial, sometimes feudal one, a world where war was a fact of life, punishment could be severe, slavery was common amongst tribes, and rigid structures are in place for warriors, agriculture, and trades. Do you think that we look at the Norse and prior Iron Age religions, there's a tendency to cherry-pick the arts, mysteries, and the good bits? This is a really good question, and a really hard one, and I don't think I'm going to have 100% the truth here. I don't think I'm going to be able to fit everything I believe in this, and I might have multiple opinions in this. I believe is that, yes, there is an element of romanticism, but I also think that there's an element of forgetting that our world is also full of war, strict, rigid social structures, slavery. There's more slaves now in the world than there were during the Viking Age. And so it's kind of a matter of perspective, right? Was the world really that much harsher? Or are we just more numb to it or more blind to the fact that our world actually hasn't changed that much? Like, yeah, we have toilet paper to wipe our ass, but the ways that we wage war on one another have gotten more brutal. I like to think that we live in a better world, but I honestly don't think humans have changed that much. But with that, I do think that there is a romanticization of the Viking Age. I believe that the Iron Age and the Viking Age were the death of Norse paganism, was the death of their belief system. So I do believe that we over-romanticize the Viking Age. So I much more prefer to look at the Bronze Age. I think the Bronze Age is where we see the height of paganism in almost every culture, at least in Europe. And so we look at the Bronze Age in Scandinavia and we see elements, these beautiful, absolutely beautiful spiritual items that were used for spiritual purposes, such as the sun cult, such as like these priest helmets that I saw in Copenhagen, and then, ceremonial weapons, ceremonial musical instruments, and then the rock carvings of Tanum in Sweden. To me, all of this shows a much more spiritual society than any of the artifacts we see from the Viking Age. Here's going to be a spicy one. So from Kidney Function is Not Right, what an interesting name, we have the question, are you allowed to write runes when learning without accidentally killing someone? Ruining something or doing something wrong? I've made several videos on the runes. My belief now is that historically, all we know the runes were really used for was writing things. They were writing on rune stones talking about so-and-so died, and so so-and-so built this rune stone. May God/Thor/Odin bless him. That is 90% of all rune stones, I guarantee you. Now, of course, there is the fact that in the Havamal, it talks about Odin taking up the runes and using runes as magic. And so I do think that runes can have a magical purpose as well. And so maybe that you kind of stay away from. I noticed that there was a comment under this person's comment saying like, no, don't do that. You need to study the runes for years before getting into them. And again, I think if you're using the runes in like a magical sense, maybe like for me, I'm still studying the runes. I have runic tattoos. There's runes all over my body. Do I think that the runes have given me any magic? Not really, from my personal experience. I think the runes look cool. These runes connect me to Odin. This rune connects me to my personal journey. The runes on my feet connect me to the community. To me, they're just symbols in a lot of ways. Where the runes change for me is understanding that most of the people in the ancient past couldn't write or read. And so runes probably were more of a chanting thing. So I use the runes as chanting within ritual to invoke certain gods, to invoke certain feelings. to invoke certain magics. And so I think maybe in the case of using the runes within ceremony, within ritual, take your time with. Don't dive into it. Much like we said earlier, I think a lot of people want to dive into the deep end. And honestly, runes, it's kind of like 50-50. Like if you want to write with them, go for it. If you want to use them as magic within ceremony, maybe take your time. Don't rush into it. The final question for this video is from Horio. How does one get their fire back? Meaning that when I first discovered Norse paganism, I was really into it when everything was new and exciting. Now it feels like I'm disconnected from the gods and I almost feel like I'm burned out. So my question is, how does one get reconnected with the gods? How does one connect with their ancestors so they don't know any ancestors that would have walked this path, meaning only ancestors that ever known were Christian and had nothing to do with this path? And so kind of answering that last question there of like the Christian ancestors, like I said earlier, most of your ancestors, while not recent, were pagan. And so even though your ancestors going back 20 generations were Christian, the ones going back to 2,000 generations were not. And I think your connection to your ancestors is constant. Your lessons from your ancestors are constant because the power pool, the immense amount of ancestors that we all have is so significant and they're always there for you. Same thing with the spirits of nature, a little bit more localized, coming to a beautiful place, building this relationship with the natural environment around you, and then building that relationship with your ancestors, I think is so big and so missed out on by so many people getting into paganism, and particularly Norse paganism. When you first get into paganism, you almost have like this euphoria that kicks out of nowhere, like, holy shit, is this a spiritual experience? And then you kind of chase that rush through ritual, through ceremony. You start getting runes, you know, put onto your body. You start worshiping Fenrir because you're like, I want to get that rush. Give me that boost. Like we're searching for it. And then either you find it or you don't, and you feel burned out because either you tried so hard or, you know, or again, you're chasing that rush constantly. When in reality, I don't think that's how our ancestors viewed the pagan religions. It was just everyday life. It was having these seasonal moments of reflection, going with the seasonal changes of the hard work in the summer with more reflective work in the winter. I think that just was the natural way they lived. And I think there is kind of this pressure when people get into Norse paganism that you have to get into shamanism, that you have to get into spirit work. You don't have to if you don't want to, if it's not something that calls to you. It's not for everyone. Stop putting pressure on yourself is a big piece of advice I would have. To be the shaman, to be Heilung, to be a Wardruna. You don't have to be these people. Just be someone who loves their natural world, who's connected to their ancestors. But yeah, as far as burnout, just know it's happened to me a few times. It's happened to many people I know. It's happened to really good friends of mine. It happens to all of us. I think the important thing is to not put pressure on yourself, to know that life is hard. I think having some kind of daily practice of gratitude, of meditation. I would even recommend having some kind of physical practice. This is something, you know, I've avoided for a while. Some people have noticed that I've lost a lot of weight. Thank you very much. I've lost about 40 pounds this last year and a half. And a lot of it has just been through diet, keeping track of what I eat, and doing yoga, and taking walks. These things make me feel connected to who I am, to my health, to my well-being. And through those connections, I have built stronger connections with the gods. So I think there is something to say about the Hindus and their belief in yoga and chakras and all these things. So I think focusing on your body's health is a great way to connect as well. So I think you'll learn a lot doing that. Final piece of advice for everyone watching this video and making it this far. First piece of advice, make sure you support me. That sounds so cheesy. But truly, I'm going to do these once a month, answering your questions, no matter how weird they get. I want to answer them. So I'll be doing that on Patreon, $5 a month, and you get yourself your questions answered. I'm going to try to answer everyone's questions in a video format with some beauty behind me. So if you want to see more videos like this, please, please, please support this channel. You don't understand how much even $5 goes. It's crazy how much $5 go. So please support this channel. Second piece of advice is what I noticed a lot of these questions had in common, even the questions I didn't answer, is a lot of it is people getting stuck in their own head. This right here is what stops us from connecting to the gods. This right here is what gets in our way because we get paranoid, we get anxious, we get scared, we get sad, we get lonely. All of these things coming from here block our connection to our heart and our connection to spirit. So sort this out and it'll help you so much. So meditation, yoga, walks, disconnection from your phone, from social media. Stop watching so much damn TV and playing video games. Get away from the screens and heal this. I cannot stress that enough. Help your mind. Do mindfulness practices and you'll be so amazed how much it improves your connection to the spirit. So thank you so very much for watching this video. Click somewhere on here for subscribe, the amazing people who support me, and more videos. And thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.